in smaller letters, was a single name that represented all the others. Marcus Webb. Mining engineer, soldier, hero. He was the first to show us the way. He will never be forgotten. None of them will. Because in the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not courage. Many species had courage. Not technology. Others had better technology. Not even stubbornness, though humanity had plenty of that. No, humanity's gift was something simpler and more powerful. The refusal to let anyone fight alone. The understanding that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart. The knowledge that standing beside someone in their darkest hour is what makes us more than just survivors. It makes us family. And families don't run away. They stand together. They fight together. They win together. The galaxy had learned that lesson, and they would never forget it. Because it was right. We know. That's exactly why you deserve the honor. The transmission ended. Morrison stood alone in the command center for a long moment, looking at the stars through the viewport. They were beautiful, those stars. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for. His communicator buzzed. Admiral, this is Captain Sarah Chun. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's something you need to see. We're picking up signals from the dimensional barrier. The anchors are working perfectly, but we're detecting something on the other side. The Say-Then are trying to communicate. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Communicate? They've never tried to communicate before. I know, sir, but they're trying now. And, sir, the translation is coming through. They're asking for peace. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the Say-Then had learned fear. They had learned that they were not invincible. They had learned that prey could become predators, that victims could become warriors. And they had learned that in all the infinite dimensions of existence, the most dangerous species they would ever face was one that refused to give up. Humanity, and the galaxy that stood with them. 100 years later, children of 300 species learned history together in schools that floated between the stars. They learned about the Great Evacuation when the galaxy ran away. They learned about the species that stayed behind. And they learned about the day when courage became contagious, when one species' refusal to surrender inspired an entire galaxy to remember its strength. On Earth, in the Great Museum of Human History, there stood a monument. It was simple, just a wall with names carved into it. Billions of names in 1,000 languages, representing every being who had died in the war. At the top of the monument were words that had become the motto of the new galactic civilization. They came, we stood, together we won. And below those words, he smiled. Humanity will be offered a permanent seat on the Galactic Council, not as junior members or students, but as equals, as leaders. You have earned that right with your blood and your courage. Morrison felt his throat tighten. We're honored, Ambassador. But we didn't do this for recognition. We did it because it was right. We know. That's exactly why you deserve the honor. The transmission ended. Morrison stood alone in the command center for a long moment, looking at the stars through the viewport. They were beautiful, those stars. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for. His communicator buzzed. Admiral, this is Captain Sarah Chun. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's something you need to see. We're picking up signals from the dimensional barrier. The anchors are working perfectly, but we're detecting something on the other side. The Say-Then are trying to communicate. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Communicate? They've never tried to communicate before. I know, sir, but they're trying now. And, sir, the translation is coming through. They're asking for peace. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the Say-Then had learned fear. They had learned that they were not invincible. They had learned that prey could become predators, that victims could become warriors. And they had learned that in all the infinite dimensions of existence, the most dangerous species they would ever face was one that refused to give up. Humanity, and the galaxy that stood with them. 100 years later, children of 300 species learned history together in schools that floated between the stars. They learned about the Great Evacuation when the galaxy ran away. They learned about the species that stayed behind. And they learned about the day when courage became contagious, when one species' refusal to surrender inspired an entire galaxy to remember its strength. On Earth, in the Great Museum of Human History, there stood a monument. Celebration began slowly, then built like a wave. Ships fired their weapons into empty space in triumph. Crews hugged each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had fled to Andromeda and beyond, people watched the recordings and wept with joy and relief. But there was sorrow too. The cost had been terrible. 5 million ships destroyed. 15 billion beings dead from 300 different species. Earth's moon had been cracked by Sathan weapons. Mars was scarred by battle. Dozens of human colonies had been wiped out. The victory was real, but the price was almost too much to bear. Admiral Morrison stood in the command center, reading the casualty reports. So many names. So many people who would never go home. He thought about Elena Rodriguez, whose ship had made it to the command nexus but hadn't made it back. He thought about Marcus Webb, the first human to die in the war. He thought about all of them, every single person who had given their lives so that others might live. "Admiral," a young officer said softly. "Sir, there's a transmission coming in. It's from the Galactic Council. They want to speak with you." Morrison nodded. "Put it through." The hologram that appeared showed representatives from 300 species. The Valerian elders, the crystalline consciousness, the eldest ones, even the Croth remnants. They were all there, standing together. Admiral Morrison, Ambassador Krell, spoke for them all. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank humanity. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for reminding us who we used to be." He paused. "The Council has voted unanimously on several matters. First, all-dimensional research will be restricted. We will develop better methods to detect and seal tears like the one the Sathan used. Second, a permanent defense fleet will be established, drawn from all member species, to guard against future threats. And third, happened. The Sathan fleet faltered. The ships that had been moving with perfect coordination suddenly became confused, crashing into each other, firing at random targets. The hive mind that controlled them had been damaged. All fleet units. Admiral Morrison's voice came across every channel. The enemy is disorganized. Press the attack. Drive them back through the dimensional tear. Don't give them time to recover. The galactic fleet surged forward with renewed strength. They pushed into the enemy formation, killing the confused Sathan by the thousands. Ship after ship fell, their impossible geometry collapsing, their dimensional tiers sealing shut. And then, for the first time in the battle, the Sathan did something unexpected. They retreated. The surviving ships pulled back toward the dimensional tear, abandoning their attack, fleeing from the combined might of 300 species who had remembered how to fight. The tear in space began to close. And as it closed, Admiral Morrison gave one final order. Fire the dimensional anchors. Now, the dimensional anchors were humanity's final innovation, developed in secret over the past 3 months. They were massive devices, each one the size of a small ship, designed for a single purpose, to seal dimensional tiers permanently. The anchors fired, embedding themselves in the fabric of space around the tear. They activated, generating a field that stabilized the boundaries between dimensions. The Sathan tried to reopen the portal, try to force their way back through, but the anchors held. The tiers sealed completely, and the enemy was trapped on the other side, cut off from our dimension, unable to return. The battle was over. The silence that followed was profound. 20 million ships, crewed by billions of beings, all suddenly quiet as they realized what had just happened. They had won, against impossible odds, against an enemy that had destroyed 1,000 galaxies. They had actually won. Her ship was damaged. Her ammunition was nearly gone, and she could see on her sensors that at least 20 of her squadron had been destroyed. But they were winning. Slowly, painfully, at terrible cost, they were actually winning. "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "we've identified what looks like a command nexus. A cluster of Sathan ships that seem to be coordinating the others. If we could take them out." Elena pulled up the tactical display. The command nexus was deep in the enemy formation, protected by thousands of hostile vessels. Getting to it would require flying through a gauntlet of enemy fire. Most of her ships wouldn't make it. How many ships would we need to reach the target? At least 20, Captain. Maybe more. And even then, the odds of success are less than 30%. Elena thought about her husband in the shelters below. Her son, fighting somewhere in this chaos. She thought about all the people across the galaxy who were depending on her squadron to do the impossible. All ships, this is Rodriguez. We're going after the command nexus. I won't lie to you, most of us won't make it. But if we succeed, we'll save thousands of other ships. Millions of lives. This is what we came here to do. She paused. I'm proud to serve with all of you. Now let's go make history. The squadron dove into the enemy formation. They flew through storms of energy and impossible geometry, through space that twisted and bent in ways that made their sensors scream. Ships died around Elena, exploding in silent bursts of light, or simply vanishing as the Sathan touched them. But they kept going. Humans and Valorians and crystallants, flying together, dying together, fighting together. 30 ships became 20. 20 became 15. 15 became 10. But they reached the command nexus. And when they did, Elena gave the order to fire everything they had left. The command ships died in a cascade of coordinated strikes. And something remarkable. All ships, attack Formation Omega. And may whatever gods you believe in watch over us all. The fleet moved as one. It was the most complex military maneuver ever attempted, coordinating ships with completely different technologies, different propulsion systems, different weapons. It should have been impossible. But they had practiced for 3 months, training together, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, becoming something new. Not a human fleet or a Valorian fleet or a crystalline fleet. A galactic fleet. The Valorians struck first, their light blade ships cutting through space at incredible speed, drawing the Sathan's attention. They fired their weapons in perfect coordination, triggering the enemy's defensive absorption and creating those precious moments of vulnerability. The crystallines followed, their energy weapons precisely calibrated to exploit the vulnerable windows. They had refined humanity's discovery, making it more efficient. Now, they could kill 3 Sathan ships for every one that had died at Triton. The eldest ones deployed their ancient weapons, devices that warped gravity itself, crushing enemy vessels or throwing them into the hearts of stars. The Moth people released swarms of small fighters that moved in patterns too complex for the Sathan to predict, striking from 1,000 angles at once. And humanity? Humanity fought with the desperate creativity that had brought them this far. They used asteroids as weapons, accelerating them to relativistic speeds and sending them crashing into enemy formations. They deployed nuclear mines that lay dormant until Sathan ships came close, then detonated in coordinated chains. They even rammed their own ships into the enemy when ammunition ran out, making every death count for something. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded a squadron of 50 vessels, a mix of human cruisers and Valorian light ships. She had been fighting for 6 hours straight, and her crew was exhausted. 100 species working together, fighting together. This has never happened before. Not in all of galactic history. Not even when the ancient Kroth Empire united the stars. Let's hope it's enough, Morrison said. The Sathan are sending more ships. According to our long-range sensors, they're gathering in the space between dimensions, building up for a massive assault. How many? We estimate 10 million vessels. Maybe more. They're bringing everything they have for one final push. Krell was quiet for a moment. Those are difficult odds. They've always been difficult odds. But now we have something we didn't have before. What's that? Morrison smiled. We have friends. The attack came on a morning that would be remembered forever. The sky above Earth split open. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. It literally tore apart, revealing the churning chaos of dimensional space beyond. Through that tear came the Sathan. 10 million ships, each one a piece of living nightmare. Each one a violation of every physical law that made the universe work. They poured into normal space like water through a broken dam, filling the sky with their impossible geometry. On Earth, people looked up and saw darkness covering the stars. On Mars, colonists huddled in their domes and prayed. On the stations and shipyards scattered throughout the solar system, billions of beings from hundreds of species prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Morrison gave the order. All ships, this is command. You know what we're fighting for. You know what's at stake. The Sathan believe we will break. They believe we will scatter. They believe we are the same species who ran away 3 months ago. He paused, looking at the holographic display that showed the combined fleet. 20 million ships from 300 worlds, all waiting for his command. Show them they're wrong. Show them what happens when the galaxy stops running and starts fighting. They had refined the technique, made it more efficient, more deadly. Then came the others. Hundreds of species, thousands of ships. The moth people from the spiral arm, whose vessels looked like great winged insects made of bronze and crystal. The Silicon Collective, artificial intelligences housed in moon-sized computing cores. The Singers, aquatic beings who navigated space in ships filled with water and communicated through songs that could shatter steel. Even the Kroth remnants arrived, the last survivors of the ancient empire that had first fought the Sathan 10 million years ago. They brought with them fragments of old weapons, half-remembered tactics, pieces of knowledge that might make the difference between victory and extinction. Within 3 months, the solar system was home to the largest military fleet in galactic history. 20 million ships from 300 species, all gathered around a small blue planet that had refused to run away. Admiral Morrison stood in the observation deck of the new command station, watching the fleet assemble. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "It's quite a sight," a musical voice said beside him. He turned to see Ambassador Krell. The Valerian looked older somehow, though Morrison wasn't sure how he could tell. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, with less arrogance and more humility. "Ambassador, I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to thank you, your species, for reminding us who we used to be." Morrison shook his head. "We didn't do anything special. We just refused to give up. That is the special thing," Krell said softly. "Do you know how long it has been since the galaxy has seen real courage? How long since anyone stood up against impossible odds? We had become soft, comfortable. We had forgotten that some things are worth dying for." He gestured to the fleet outside. "You reminded us. And now look what has happened. 3. Way to fight when we had accepted defeat." He stood straighter. "The Valerian Council has voted. Our fleet is returning. It will take us 3 months to reach your system, but we are coming. We are coming to fight beside you, to stand with you, to prove that we remember what honor means." The transmission ended. Elena stared at the empty hologram for a long moment. Then she started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, not exactly. It was the laugh of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight and suddenly felt it grow lighter. "Admiral Morrison," she said into her communicator. "Did you receive that?" "I did, Captain. And I'm receiving similar transmissions from 17 other species. The crystallants are coming back. The eldest ones are turning their arc ships around. Even some of the Kroth's successor states are sending fleets." Morrison's voice was thick with emotion. "It seems humanity's stubbornness is contagious." Elena smiled, wiping tears from her eyes. "We're not alone anymore." "No," Morrison agreed. "We never were. We just had to remind them of that." The ships began arriving 6 weeks after the Battle of Triton. First came the Valerian fleet, 3,000 warships that had turned around halfway to Andromeda and burned their engines at maximum power to get back. Their vessels were sleek and beautiful, shaped like blades of light that cut through space itself. Ambassador Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship as they entered the solar system, and he felt something he had not felt in many years: hope. The Valorians were followed by the crystallants, beings of pure energy who existed in ships made of solidified thought. They were ancient and wise, and they had not fought a war in 3 million years. But they remembered how. The eldest ones came next, their massive arc ships carrying not just warriors but scientists and engineers who had spent the journey studying humanity's discovery about the Sathan's vulnerability. The battle raged for 18 hours. Humanity learned quickly, adapting their tactics, perfecting their timing. They discovered that coordinating attacks across multiple ships made the vulnerable window slightly longer. They found that certain frequencies of energy disrupted the Sathan's dimensional phasing more effectively than others. They learned, and they fought, and they died. By the time the last Sathan ship retreated back through its dimensional tear, Triton was safe. But the human fleet had paid a terrible price. 3,000 ships destroyed. 4 million people dead. The survivors limped back to their stations and shipyards, damaged and exhausted. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking at the casualty reports. So many names. So many people who had woken up yesterday morning, not knowing they would never see another sunset. "Captain," her tactical officer said softly, "we're receiving a transmission. It's not from Earth or any human station. It's coming from deep space, from the direction of Andromeda." Elena frowned. Andromeda? That's where the evacuees fled. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life. Ambassador Krell appeared, his shimmering form projected across light years of space. "Commander Chun, Admiral Morrison, Captain Rodriguez, this is Ambassador Krell of the Valerian Commonwealth. I am transmitting to every human vessel and station in your system." He paused, and Elena could see something in his expression she had never seen before. "Shame. We watched your battle at Triton. We watched from the safety of our new home, millions of light years away. We watched you discover what we never could, how to hurt the Sathan, how to fight them." His voice grew stronger. "For 72 hours, my people have been debating, arguing, fighting among ourselves, because we saw something at Triton that shamed us all. We saw courage. We saw a species that refused to run, that refused to give up, that found a attack perfectly, hit them with conventional weapons first to trigger the destabilization, then follow up with a second strike during the vulnerable window. The timing would have to be exact. Can we do it? Theoretically, yes. In practice, it'll be nearly impossible. We're talking about millisecond precision across thousands of ships." Elena thought about her husband, who was working in the shelters below. She thought about her son, who was serving on a cargo ship 300,000 kilometers away. She thought about all the people depending on her to buy them time, to give them a chance. Send a firing solution to all ships. We're going to try this. If it doesn't work, at least we'll die knowing we tried. The attack came 60 seconds later. First wave, conventional missiles and kinetic weapons. The Sathan ships absorbed them as expected, their surfaces flickering with that brief moment of instability. Second wave, focused plasma beams, timed to hit during the vulnerable window. It almost didn't work. Most of the ships fired too early or too late, their weapons absorbed or deflected. But 3 ships, a military cruiser, a mining vessel, and a converted passenger liner, got the timing exactly right. Their plasma beams hit 3 Sathan vessels during the moment of vulnerability. And the alien ships died. They didn't explode or burn. They simply collapsed, folding in on themselves like paper crumpling. The dimensional tiers that powered them sealed shut, and the ships fell away into normal space, just dead metal and strange geometry. For a moment, there was absolute silence across the fleet. Then someone started cheering. Within seconds, every ship was celebrating. They had done it. They had hurt the enemy. The Sathan could be killed. All ships, reform defensive line. Elena ordered, though she was smiling now. "We know how to fight them now. Let's make them regret coming here." And the human fleet moved to intercept them. 5,000 ships, ranging from massive military dreadnoughts to converted fishing trawlers, formed a defensive line around the moon. It was home to 3 million colonists, families who had spent generations building a new life in the outer solar system. Those people were now huddled in underground shelters, praying that someone would save them. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the defense. She was 42 years old, a career officer who had spent 20 years in the Earth Space Navy. She was professional, calm, and utterly terrified. "All ships, this is Rodriguez. Fire on my mark. Target the lead vessel. Full spread, everything we've got." The human fleet opened fire. 10,000 missiles launched simultaneously, followed by energy weapons, railguns, and experimental plasma cannons. The amount of destructive force humanity unleashed in that moment could have destroyed a dozen planets. The Sathan ships absorb it all. The missiles vanished when they got close, simply ceasing to exist. The energy weapons bent around the alien vessels, as if space itself was protecting them. The railgun slugs passed through the enemy ships without leaving a mark, as if firing at ghosts. Jesus Christ, someone whispered on the open channel. How do we fight this? But Elena had been watching carefully. She had seen something the others had missed. When the Sathan ships absorbed the attacks, there was a brief moment, less than a second, when their surfaces flickered. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Tactical. Did you record that? Yes, Captain. Analyzing now. A moment later, the tactical officer's voice came back, excited despite the fear. Captain, I think I've got something. When they absorb energy, their dimensional phasing destabilizes for 0.3 seconds. If we could hit them during that window, they'd be vulnerable, Elena finished. How do we exploit that? We need to coordinate our. Gave them an impossible choice. They chose to stand and fight. He fired his missiles at the Sathan scout ship. All 6 of them, everything he had. The missiles streaked through space, their nuclear warheads bright against the darkness. They hit the enemy vessel dead center. The explosions were massive, each one carrying enough destructive force to vaporize a small moon. The light was so bright that Marcus had to shield his eyes. When the glare faded, the Sathan ship was still there, undamaged, unchanged. It simply absorbed the energy of the explosions and continued moving forward, sliding through space like oil on water. Oh God, Marcus whispered. It didn't even feel that. The alien vessel turned toward him. There was no visible propulsion system, no engine flare or thrust vector. It simply moved, defying every law of physics Marcus understood. He tried to run, pushing his ship's engines to maximum power, but it was like trying to outrun his own shadow. The Sathan ship was faster, much faster. It reached him in seconds. Marcus didn't have time to scream. The alien vessel didn't fire weapons or deploy boarding parties. It simply touched his ship, and his ship stopped existing. Not destroyed, not exploded, just gone. One moment, there was metal and circuitry and a man named Marcus Webb who had loved his family and done his best. The next moment, there was nothing. Empty space, as if the ship had never been there at all. 300,000 kilometers away, on the bridge of the UESS Defiant, Admiral Morrison watched the sensor feed go dark. We just lost Webb, the tactical officer reported, her voice shaking slightly. No debris. No explosion. The ship just vanished. Morrison felt his jaw tighten. Send the alert to all stations. The Sathan are here. Activate Defensive Protocol Omega. And may God help us all. The first major battle happened at Triton, Neptune's largest moon. The Sathan had sent a dozen ships through their dimensional tear. Edge of the solar system. Humanity had assembled a fleet of 35,000 vessels. Most of them were civilian conversions, crewed by people who had never fired a weapon in their lives. But they were ready to fight. They had no illusions about victory. They knew they were going to die. But they also knew something else, something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes dying on your feet is better than living on your knees. The Sathan arrived on a Tuesday morning. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was on patrol duty in the outer asteroid belt when his sensors detected the anomaly. At first, he thought it was a sensor glitch, a ghost image created by cosmic radiation or equipment malfunction. But then the readings stabilized, and he saw it clearly. Space itself was tearing open. It looked like someone had taken a knife to reality and cut a hole in the universe. Through that hole came something that should not exist. The scout ship was wrong in every way that mattered. Its geometry didn't make sense, angles that bent in directions that hurt to look at. Its surface seemed to shift between solid and liquid and something else entirely, something that had no name in any human language. It made no sound, but Marcus could feel it anyway, a pressure in his mind like fingernails scraping across the inside of his skull. Contact! Contact! He shouted into his radio. Enemy vessel detected. Sector 7 Alpha 3. I'm engaging. His ship was a converted mining vessel, designed to drill into asteroids and extract precious metals. Now it carried 6 missile tubes and a plasma cannon that had been welded to its hull 3 weeks ago. Marcus had been a mining engineer before the war. He had spent 15 years in deep space, quietly doing his job, sending money home to his wife and 2 daughters on Mars. He had never wanted to be a soldier, but when the call came for volunteers, he had signed up without hesitation, because that's what humans did. When a universe spanning millions of worlds, had abandoned their homes and fled into the dark. Only one species remained: humanity, alone in an empty galaxy, waiting for the enemy to arrive. The news spread across Earth like wildfire, not from government broadcasts or official announcements, but from the people themselves. Messages on social media, conversations in cafes, speeches in public squares. The world's leaders had called for volunteers to help prepare for the coming war. They had expected perhaps a few million people to respond. Instead, everyone volunteered. Everyone. Teachers became engineers, building defensive satellites around Earth and Mars. Doctors became combat medics, preparing field hospitals in every major city. Farmers became soldiers, learning to operate weapons they had only seen in movies. Children too young to fight helped in factories and supply centers, sorting equipment and carrying messages. The elderly, those too frail to work in the war effort, became teachers and counselors, helping people prepare emotionally for what was coming. No one complained. No one asked why they should fight an impossible battle. They simply worked day and night, transforming their entire civilization into a war machine. Factories that had made cars now produced missiles. Shipyards that had built cruise liners now constructed warships. Universities that had studied poetry and philosophy now focused on military technology and combat medicine. The transformation was total and absolute. In 3 months, humanity accomplished what should have taken 10 years. Every civilian ship in the solar system was retrofitted for combat. Mining vessels became bombers, carrying nuclear payloads and antimatter charges. Cargo freighters became troop transports, their holds filled with Marines instead of merchandise. Even pleasure yachts and personal craft were armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. By the time the first Sathan Scout ships appeared at the